Yeah.
So we are continuing from last week, and the issue of establishing a Sanhedrin in our present days. Okay? And we went through many of the sources last week, and today we're going to just review the main source, and then I'm going to add a little bit more on that main source, and then going to see an event that actually took place in 1538 in Tzfat, where there was an appointing of the Sanhedrin, and there was much up and back about that being legitimate or not being legitimate. Actually, it involved a person of no less stature than Rabbi Yosef Karo, right, who is the compiler of the Shulchan Aruch, in addition to writing the Kesef Mishnah explanation on the Rambam, and the Beis Yosef explanation on the Tur, right? So we will see, it will get very interesting. Now, we discussed last week...
Napoleon?
I'm sorry?
We'll exclude Napoleon?
I'm not going to discuss Napoleon's Sanhedrin. Okay? I mean, it is mentioned in this article that we have from Rabbi Kaganov, and maybe I'll give it the 10 to 15 seconds that it deserves. Okay? But no more than that.
That long?
We'll see. Okay. So, the main source that we had was the Rambam in the Laws of Sanhedrin, chapter 4, Halacha Yud Aleph, which is not in this week's source sheet. We had it on last week's source sheet. And there the Rambam wrote as follows. The Rambam wrote, okay, nearly it appears to me that if all the sages, all the Chachamim in the land of Israel will agree to appoint dayanim, judges, and to give them this smicha, this ordination, they are now smuchim. Right? And they can go on and they can judge, and they can do all the things and that the smuchim do, those who have the ordination can do, and they can also then confer that authority on to others. Right? If that's the case, the Rambam says it can be easily restored. So why was there such a mitztarin? Why was there such anguish over the smicha? We learned last week of Yehuda ben Bava, who gave up his life in order to give smicha to 5 others. He said the reason is because Yisroel are spread out, and it's impossible for everyone to agree. But if there is someone who's samuch in the lineage, then we don't need everyone's agreement, right? And then he ends off, Vadavar tzarech hechra. The matter still requires resolution. Okay? So it's unclear if he himself is comfortable with it, or if he's just presenting it as a possibility. Now the Rambam, in addition to the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam that I'm quoting from, the Rambam also wrote a Perush on Mishnayot, his explanation on the Mishnah. And in Sanhedrin there, he writes as follows in his Perush HaMishnah, where we spoke about the smicha of Zekanim, right? The ordination of elders. Now someone had asked last week, well, where does the Rambam get this from? And I said, the Rambam has the shoulders that if we don't know where he's getting it from, that will not take away from it. Here the Rambam writes something very interesting. He writes, it seems to me, when there be a haskama, an agreement from all the sages and the Talmidim, laktim aleim ish minay yeshiva, right, to bring forward one of their colleagues, the asimo to l'rosh, and to make him their leader, as long as he's be'eretz Yisroel, then this person can then establish this yeshiva, v'yiyeh samuch, and he will have smicha. V'yismo chuach k'mishi yirtzeh, and then he can confer that smicha to those that he wants. Then he adds in the interesting words, She'im lo tomar kain, if we're not going to say this, Efshar she'yimtza beit din hagadol la'olam. We're never going to have a beit din hagadol again. Because we're going to need that one of them is samuch. And God said, V'yashuvу. As we say, there's a pasuk, V'ashiva shovtayach kevarishona. The pasuk says, I will reinstate your judges as they were originally. V'yoatzayich kavat chila, acharei ken yikra lecha ira tzedek. And then this city will be known as the city of righteousness. V'zeh yeh below safek, and this will certainly happen when God will align the hearts of people, and our merits will increase, and our desire for God and the Torah will become great before the coming of the Mashiach, as it's clear from Psukim. Okay? So the Rambam says, right, there's got to be a means of doing it if the prophets speak about the reinstating of this before the Yom HaGadol, before the great day of the Messiah's arrival. So that is the Rambam. Let us see what actually happened. Okay. This happened around the year 1538. After the Spanish expulsion, many Jews remained in Spain, and again, a thank you to Rabbi Kaganoff who put this all together. Practicing their Judaism in secret, appearing publicly as Christians, right? If they had the choice of being burned at the stake, if they kept their Judaism, converting, or leaving the country. Thousands of these secret Jews eventually escaped to areas where they could return to the religion of their fathers, yet they were haunted by the sins they had committed in their previous lives. Many were concerned they would never escape the specter of their more serious averot, some of which carried the punishment of karet. They had become true balei teshuva, truly repentant, but they lived in fear of the repercussions, the judgment of their actions. The Mari Bey Rav, who is the Rav in Tzvat in the early 16th century, came up with an original solution for the problem. Let's see the Mishnah in Makot, which is on the sheet that I gave you. This is the side A. Yes.
Thank you. Or is it?
No. Okay. So on this side, where it says start with Rambam, which I did, and then it says Makot 23a. The Mishnah says Kol chayve kritot. Okay, the Torah says don't. The Torah says don't for many different commandments. Okay? Now, some of them are simply don't, and if there's no specific, there's some that are don't with capital punishment. There are some that are don't with karet, with a spiritual cutting off, and there are some that are just don't. Now, a just don't, if there was proper warning and witnesses, etc., then one would be liable to lashes. Now, the Mishnah is discussing a situation where it's a greater don't. It's a don't lest you'll have this spiritual cutting off known as karet. And let's say in such a case a person received lashes. Will the lashes exempt this person from this spiritual cutting off or not? So the Mishnah says, Kol chayve kritot, and we have both in Hebrew and English, all those who are liable for the penalty of karet, which is the spiritual excision, shelaku, if they received lashes, niftru yedei kritatam, their kritut, that punishment of karet, is off. Shenemar, it says, v'nikla achicha leinecha. The pasuk says, and your brother will be hit before your eyes. V'nikla, he will be hit. Who will be hit? Achicha, your brother. So we learn out that once he received that punishment and accepted that punishment, harehu ka'achicha, he is now like your brother, meaning he is part of the group. He no longer has this karet, this spiritual cutting off. That is the Mishnah that we have there in Makot. So now the Mari Bey Rav said, this is an answer for all of those Jews who, under threat of being burned at the stake, they took on the outer vestiges of Christianity, but they were not accepting Christianity. They were staying true to their religion as long as they could. And once they were able to return, they were afraid of all of the sins that they had done under duress. So they were afraid that they had karet. So he said, this is a way to take the karet off of them. What can we do? We can give them lashes. What's the problem with that?
It hurts.
Besides it hurting, they wanted it, right? The problem is, who can who can rule on lashes? A Beit Din that has smicha. But he didn't have a Beit Din with smicha, the very topic of our issue here. So what did he say? See, he said, based on the Rambam, 25 Gedolim, great Torah leaders of Tzvat, which was the largest Torah community at the time in Israel, granted smicha to Maharei Beirav. They gave the Maharei Beirav smicha. He then ordained other people with that smicha, including Rav Yosef Karo, okay, and others. Yes?
How do we know that this Beit Din has to have smicha? Because not all Bate Dinim need to have smicha.
In order to give any sort of physical punishment, one needs to have smicha. Yeah.
And the source for that
Nowadays, like I
The
mentioned,
source for that is?
oh, that the Mishnah learns out.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Nowadays,
Makos.
Nowadays we have Batei Din that will deal with marriages, divorce, conversions, and monetary matters, which the attendees, the litigants, sign on arbitration agreements. They're accepting the authority of that Beit Din. But when it comes to a physical punishment,
And the Bate Dinim that go after men who won't give a...
okay, we're not going to get into that right now. That is incorrect.
I didn't mean to raise the
Yes.
political issue.
Yes.
That's another basis for saying that they don't have authority.
Correct.
To argue that?
Yeah, it would seem so. Okay, so Maharei Beirav said the way to help out these poor Jews who under duress did things they didn't want to do was to give them makos. Now, he also sent smicha to the Rav of Yerushalayim, Rav Levi ibn Chaviv, known as the Maharal Bach, who he thought would be happy to receive such a wonderful gift. He was not happy. He returned it, and he took issue with their conferring of the smicha. He felt they were wrong in going ahead with the smicha. Why? Well, from the Rambam itself, what issue can we bring? The Rambam itself seems he was unsure, right? The Rambam's last words were "Adavar tzarich hechra." The matter still needs to be clarified, resolved. It's not clear. So the Rambam himself says, his own word shows he has not fully agreed to it. Now, there's also a Ramban, which is the second source over here, who's talking about establishing the calendar. And I underlined it. Those who can follow in Hebrew, otherwise just listen carefully. Vinay, Hayom, nowadays, Nedar Beit Din Hazeh Mikol Yisroel. We no longer have a Beit Din in Israel who can sanctify the months, the years, etc. But there was someone who healed this possible calamity. That is Rav Hillel Hanassi, who was the son of Yehuda Hanassi. That he set up Cheshbon Ibar. He set up a calendar for us of the months and the years according to the calendar until Eliyahu Hanavi, until the prophet Elijah will come and bring us back to our state. Al Piyariyah Beit Din, that once again we'll have testimony in Beit Din. That should happen Meher V'Yameinu. Shehu Zachor L'Tov Ra'ahi, may his name be blessed, saw Shitbalu HaMoadot. Right? Because without smicha, we don't have anyone who can establish these calendars. V'chol davar sh'tzarich mumchin, and all these things that require these experts. And therefore he established this whole calendar of the months and the years, ad sheyibaneh Beit HaMikdash. Until when? Until the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. And therefore, right, because there's no Beit Din until that time who will be able to accept testimony, etc., etc. So the Ramban seems to be saying very clearly when that Hillel set up the calendar to carry us through until when? Until Mashiach.
That's only when the Beit Din's in Yerushalayim. If we were Beit Din in Bavel, we would still have the same issue and we'd still use Hillel's calendar.
Yes, but he's saying that Hillel set this up until the time of the Mashiach, implying that until that time there is no other recourse. He didn't say until the time that we will reappoint the Sanhedrin. He said until the time of Mashiach. So there are those that say from the Ramban we hear that you cannot appoint a Beit Din until that time.
But if you're going to draw that conclusion that Rabbi Hillel Nasi held that there would not be a Sanhedrin that could call Chodesh until Mashiach, all he was saying is it would not be a Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. He wasn't saying that...
The Sanhedrin, even the Rambam says, could only be appointed in Israel.
Well, I understand that. But
right.
The Sanhedrin did sit outside of Yerushalayim. Right? The Sanhedrin moved...
yes, but it was appointed in Israel, and then at a certain point...
But once they were out of Yerushalayim, they could not declare Chodesh. They didn't take witnesses.
They still would be able to, right? They would have the ability to, whether they would or not outside. Now, outside Israel they couldn't, right? But they had the ability to. But once we no longer had Smuchin, Ramban says no good until the time of the Mashiach.
So he would counter this.
Okay, so therefore Maral Bach said, A, the Rambam was unsure. B, the Ramban is against it. Thirdly, he said, even if we'll say the Ramban was not unsure, the Ramban accepted it, it wasn't done properly since you needed to have all the rabbis. And he wasn't in. Other rabbis weren't in. So they didn't have all of the rabbis involved. Shalom, shalom. How are you?
Did you want lunch? Should I get lunch for you?
Thank you.
Yes?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, how about those poor Jews who came to the Mari Beirav for a solution? And he had a solution. Does the Maral Bach have a solution for them? He said yes, a very simple solution. Also another Gemara in Makot, which is the next source on the sheet there. Rabbi Akiva says, Chayve Kritot, Yeshnan Bichlal Malkut Arba'im. Rabbi Akiva says that if someone did something for which they are obligated this karet, this spiritual excision, then Malkut could apply. Why? Rabbi Akiva is going to show why we'll be more lenient by a chiyuv of karet than by a chiyuv of mita, than by a capital punishment. And what does he say? He said we see another leniency by karet. She'im asu teshuva, because if a person is obligated, liable for karet, and the person did teshuva, beitin shamala mochelin lahen, the heavenly beitin will forgive them. Whereas an earthly Beit Din will not forgive someone if they do teshuva for something that they're obligated in a capital case. But what's the most important thing we see over here? Teshuva. As we said on Yom Kippur, teshuva cleanses a person. And therefore, these, as he calls them, the crypto Jews, have nothing to worry about. If they have done teshuva, they repented for the misdeeds that they did under that terrible duress, then we're okay.
They didn't do it completely.
It isn't a lot of the rules like these rules. On the side of the ordinary Jew who finds himself or herself in these difficult situations, and they try to find ways to absolve them. Right? This was a difficult situation for these Jewish people.
Yes.
And so it seems as if they're trying to
Correct.
find the way so
Correct.
they could become Jews again.
And Maral Bach is saying we don't need anything fancy.
Right.
Good old-fashioned repentance is all you need. And then he went further. And he said, I don't even understand what the Marei Beirav wanted to do would accomplish. What would the lashes do? He said, in order to receive lashes, you need to have warning beforehand. You need to accept that warning. You need to have proper witnesses, right? And therefore, none of these Jews were in such a situation, so lashes would not even accomplish anything, right? But you don't need that, he said, because all you need is the teshuvah. That was his response to Mari Beirav.
Well, if they don't do it properly, then it's
They'll do what properly?
Again, Shuva. Then it's in the balance again, and it didn't do anything.
Okay, but that's in their hands to do. The Marei Beirav responded. He said that if someone voluntarily asks for Malkut in the presence of an authorized Beit Din, then it will be carried out even without the witnesses and the warning. So this Beit Din would help. And he felt that the Rambam was definitive, not vacillating, and we follow the Rambam over the Ramban even if he disagreed. And he said a majority of the rabbis is enough. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, thank you very much. So that wasn't resolved, right? But what is interesting is we know that one of those who received smicha was Rav Yosef Karo. He didn't pass it on to many other people. And in his Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't rule that we now have a Beit Din, right? He rules that we don't have, this a Beit Din. It doesn't come up further. So that all died down.
This was during the Spanish Inquisition.
After.
It was, like 1493?
Right. This was in the 1530s in Sfat, following that.
Right.
Exactly right. Yes, Ira.
Suggesting that Rav Potter's unanimity?
I'm sorry?
That Rav, the majority, counts as if it's unanimity? Like,
So that's the question. Well, the question is, no. The question is when the Rambam said all,
Right.
did he mean literally all?
Or Rav.
Or did he mean rov? Usually when it comes to halacha, we go with rov. The question is over here, did he need... Now, I pointed out last week that he goes on to say, and that he goes on to use the words, that the efshar shiaskimu kulan. Right? And so, remember he said, so if that's the case, why do they go to such lengths in order to try to maintain the smicha? Because he says Israel will be spread out, and it's impossible they all would agree.
Yes.
Right? So I said, to me, it's impossible, right? If it's all you need is majority, it's probably not so impossible. Impossible seems to imply that you need every single person.
The Rambam didn't say teku. He says, I'm not sure. That's not, so you could look at the other side of it. He's not saying that it's also.
Well,
He's
yes.
saying-
But to go
teku,
more than the Rambam is the one who goes the furthest.
Right.
To go more than the Rambam, no one really wants to do that. Meaning if the Rambam
Well, the
said...
Rambam always was willing to count
If the
as
Rambam
right.
is saying, I'm not sure if you can do this if you have everyone, then no one's going to come forward and say, well, maybe you can do it if you have most. Right? At best, we could say the Rambam held that most is enough. Now, there's another very interesting Gemara that I have on the sheet over here. I only have it in the English. The Gemara said, come in here. If a man said, let me be a Nazirite on the day on which the son of David comes. Now, a Nazirite is not allowed to drink wine. Well, he can drink wine on Sabbath and festival days. So it seems the Gemara is taken as a given that the Mashiach is not going to come on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. Right? Now, why is that? So the Gemara goes on to say, but it's forbidden to drink wine on any weekdays. Now, it's in Scripture it said, behold, I will send you, Hinei anochi sholech lachem et Eliyahu hanavi, lifnei ba Yom Hashem hagadol v'hanora. Right? So I will send Elijah the prophet before the coming of the Messiah. Right? So therefore, the Gemara wants to say, oh, so I can drink wine on a Shabbat or a Sunday, or a Yom Tov, because if he came the day before, right, Mashiach's only going to come if Elijah came the day before, and we would know about it. The Gemara says, fair enough, but that applies, if so, even on the weekdays. Should we've made it on that day, since Elijah not come the previous day. If that's the reason, that's not just a reason for Shabbat and Yom Tov, that should allow every day. Every day is allowed, because if Mashiach's coming today, Elijah had to announce it yesterday. If he didn't announce it, we didn't hear about it, then he's not coming today, so I can drink wine. But the fact is that we assume that he appeared before the high court, the Gemara says. No. Maybe we didn't hear about it. But Eliyahu did appear before who? The Beit Din Hagadol. Sorry? No, down here. Right? So then Gemara says, well, that's the case. So then even on Shabbat and Yom Tov, he might have arrived there on a Friday also. So the Gemara's conclusion is, we have a tradition, Eliyahu is not going to come on Shabbat or on Yom Tov, because everyone is too busy in those days. Okay, Mashiach's not going to come on those days. But along the way, the Maritz Chiyot points out, Mikan Raya Berurah. Here we have a clear proof to the Rambam, who said in Perush HaMishnayot that Bisman Hazeh, nowadays we have the possibility of Smicha, if we'll all get together, because otherwise, right, you're not going to find the Beit Din Hagadol, right? V'hakadosh Baruch Hu yed lanu sheyashuvu, right? So what do we see over here? We see that we're saying before Mashiach comes, Eliyahu is going to go where? Elijah is going to go where to announce it?
Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin. So you see, you'll have the Sanhedrin before the Mashiach comes. Right? Here we're saying, Anu Amrinan, the Eliyahu yavo lebeit din hagadol. Eliyahu will come to the Beit Din Hagadol. Right? So therefore it's clear before the coming of Elijah, the Beit Din Hagadol might be here. Can be reinstated. Which is like the Rambam. Interesting. Now, there was another great Rav known as the Radbaz. Okay? The Radbaz, who was the Gadol Hador, the leader of the generation, who lived in Egypt at the time of the ruling, that the Marei Rav made his Sanhedrin. So they appealed to him for a ruling. Who's right? Okay? He later moved to Israel. At the time he was not there in Israel. The Radbaz ruled like the Marabach, that the Smicha was invalid. He understood that the Rambam himself was not certain about reinstating it, and even there, it must be, right? He said anyone receiving the Smicha must be a Talmid Chacham with the scholarship to rule on any subject in Torah, and he felt that in his generation, there was no one, himself included, who was truly on that level. If that's the case, then how can it ever be reinstated? So he gave 3 methods through which he felt Smicha could be reestablished. He said, Eliyahu Hanavi has Smicha. He can give it to others. When he arrives at the very beginning. Right? So it could be that Eliyahu Hanavi will come first, make a and says the Gemara Irvine, will come first, make a Beit Din, right? And then let that Beit Din know about the coming of the Mashiach. Secondly, he says, interesting, descendants of the lost tribes might reappear, and they might have a continuing process of smicha. They might not have lost that, right? Outside of Israel, is that was part of the Ira?
You suggest, is it said that Eliyahu Hanavi could be an aid before the...
Not an aide.
He's witness to Mashiach coming, to be an aide before the Dayanim he appointed.
Well, it's not a matter of a witness. It's a matter of he's a newscaster.
Yeah, but
He'll
then
inform
what's
us.
the role of the Sanhedrin in that process of that Mashiach? Because the Mashiach's going to come
I'm not sure what the
anyway?
role is. The pasuk says, that I'm going to send Elijah the prophet on the day before.
Right.
So maybe he'll have a very busy day. Besides all the tekus in the Gemara,
Yeah.
right? Right? He's going to appoint the Sanhedrin and then let them know Mashiach is coming, perhaps.
But what would we? Is it for no purpose at all that he appoints a Sanhedrin just to announce?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe to get things ready for that new era as it is ushered in. Okay. The Marebe Rav passed away 3 years after his smicha project. Rav Yosef Karo received the smicha and ordained the Alshich, as he's known, but never utilized the smicha in any other way. He does not refer to the renewal of smicha, and places in Shulchan Aruch, he writes, would have been written differently if there would have been, had he assumed there was a beit din of musmachim. Right? He assumes no beit din is around to exercise this smicha. The Alshich ordained Rav Chaim Vital, who is the main student of the Arizal, of the Kabbalist Arizal. And the smicha trail seems to end at that point. Okay? And thus it remained for the next 200 to 300 years. Until in the 1830s. Well, okay, I said I would give a little bit. Okay, Napoleon decreed the opening of the Sanhedrin of 71 Jewish leaders, many not religious, communal leaders, right? The only thing that's had to do with Sanhedrin is that he called it the Sanhedrin. He presented the group of 12 inquiries to answer, right? All of which question whether the Jews were loyal to the French Empire and its rules and interaction with Jews and non-Jews. The Sanhedrin had to be very careful how to answer his questions to make sure they were not guilty of treason. Okay? It met for a few times in the course of a year, and then it was disbanded. However, in the 1830s, a leading Talmud, disciple of the Vilna Gaon, who had settled in Yerushalayim, I mentioned, I think last week, or we mentioned at a certain point, that many of the minhagim, of the customs of the Ashkenazic community in Israel follow the customs of the Vilna Gaon, because it was his students who reestablished the Ashkenazic community in Israel in the 1800s. That's why the Ashkenazim will say Morid Hatal in the summer, whereas other Ashkenazim here do not, because that is the minhag of the Gra. Now, Rabbi Yisroel of Shklov made another attempt to restart Smicha. He wanted a Sanhedrin. He accepted the ruling of the Marabach and the Rabbis that we can't do it by ourselves. So therefore, he wanted to try to track down the lost tribes, the tribe of Reuven, and see if they had an ongoing smicha. And he charted out where he thought they were located. He sent an emissary there, but the lost tribe of Reuven was not found. Now, the question though is, what would it have helped? If we said the smicha could only go on, right? Smicha could only be granted in Israel, then how could Reuven, wherever they might have been located, how could they have continued giving smicha and have that considered to be valid smicha if it can only be done in Israel? And it seems that he held that since Reuven was already cut off from the rest of Israel before the decision that smicha could only be done in Israel was accepted, therefore they were not bound by that ruling, and they would have been able to continue to grant smicha even outside of Israel. However, it was for naught, because he did not locate those lost tribes. Interesting. we've come across many groups who follow Jewish teachings from an earlier point. We have the Ethiopians, right, who follow many, and in my opinion, very, very wisely, the Rabbanut asked them all respectfully to go through a conversion process, misafek, based on doubt, not negating their Jewish lineage, but making sure that they would be fully welcomed into the Jewish communities at large, and there would not be any questions whatsoever of their marrying and becoming fully part of Klal Yisroel. So there are groups that have surfaced that we think might be remnants of the 10 lost tribes, but certainly none who had a strong continuation of that smicha process. And then I copied an article from Arat Sheva, October 13th, but I underlined 2004. Okay? So 11 years and a few days ago. Sanhedrin launched in Tiberias. A unique ceremony, probably only the second of its kind in the past 1600 years, is taking place in Tiberias today. The launching of a Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish legal tribunal in the land of Israel. Sanhedrin, a religious assembly that convened in one of the holy temple chambers in Jerusalem, comprised 71 sages, existed during the Talmudic period, and from several decades before the Common Era until roughly 425 CE. Details of today's ceremony are still sketchy, but the organizers announced their intention to convene 71 rabbis who have received special rabbinic ordination as specified by none other than Maimonides. Right? The Rambam is the source upon which someone can hang their hat and say, that's why we're doing this. An attempt to reconvene the Sanhedrin was made several centuries ago in Tzfat. We discussed the binding fact for endured such greats as Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch. However, the opposition of other leading rabbis soon forced the end of the endeavor. One of the leaders of today's attempt to revive the Sanhedrin is Rabbi Yishai Ba'avad of Beit El. He said the 71 rabbis from across the spectrum received a special ordination in accordance with Maimonides' rulings over the past several months. He explained the membership of the new body is not permanent. What is much more crucial is the establishment of this body. Those who are members of today will not necessarily be members tomorrow. Actually, they agreed that when there are other more knowledgeable Rabbanim who will take their place, they will respectfully sit down and vacate their place. The goal is to have one rabbinic body in Jerusalem that will convene monthly and issue rulings on central issues. This is the need of the generation of the hour. Rabbi Yisroel Ariel, who heads the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, is one of the participating rabbis. The Temple Institute is fascinating. If you go to Yerushalayim, you should definitely pay a visit to the Temple Institute. They are building the vessels for the Bayit Shlishi, for the third temple. Whether this will be the actual Sanhedrin we await is a question of time. Just like the establishment of the state, we rejoice in it, but we are still waiting something much more ideal. It's a process. Today's ceremony is the contribution of the renewal of the ordination process in Israel, which we marked several months ago. Rabbi Ariel said that the rabbis there included many from the entire spectrum: Haredi, religious Zionists, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Hasidic, and many others such as Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and many others. We can't expect a great consensus, but that's how things work here. Sometimes the process goes from the bottom up. Okay. Now, the fact that 11 years later, how many of you have heard much about this Sanhedrin by a show of hands?
I read something years ago. I think it's 2004. Maybe
Yeah.
that's when I read it.
Yeah.
I read something recently.
Yes. So it hasn't taken root. Actually, Rabbi Kaganoff writes that he was approached, or interesting, he writes about this group, this Sanhedrin, right? He said, I spoke to one of the Dayanim and asked about their procedure. He said the organization mailed letters to every shul and settlement in Israel requesting appointment of a certain well-respected rabbi as musmach. They then counted the votes of those who responded and approved of the appointment. Since most of those who responded approved, Therefore they said, right, we had the majority. Those who chose not to respond were not counted, which is clearly a,
Statistical.
Anomaly, right? That's not a basis to say that, okay, majority agreed. Many people probably thought this is, not serious, or, they thought they might be serious, but they didn't feel it was serious, and they chose to ignore it. Right? They were willing to make Rabbi Kaganoff, the author here, one of the groups. Right? He said, when I spoke to him, I had questions about the halachic basis for their procedures. He says, send it in writing, which Rabbi Kaganoff says he did, and he says he never received any reply. And, in this day and age, right, we do have, across the spectrum, we do have our Torah leaders, our poskim, and they don't seem to have signed up at this point with this Sanhedrin. So it seems that we're going to need to continue with Hillel's calendar, and hope and pray, especially with all the craziness that's going on in our Holy Land today, and all the ridiculous bloodshed that's going on, that the end of this vicious galus, of this vicious exile, should come speedily. Eliyahu should come and should convene his Sanhedrin, give his smicha to others, and let them know that Mashiach is on his way. The time that the entire world will recognize and accept God in this world. Okay. Yes?
I was under the impression that the whole world was supposed to know when Eliyahu returned. That it wasn't just going to be in Israel, but everybody would know.
At a certain point they will. The question is, at what point in the process will it happen? Will he first inform the Beit Din Hagadol, right? It's going to be a process. Certainly the idea is that the entire world will know and accept. I once asked one of my rabbis, how can we think that the whole world is going to accept? We are so factionalized. Everyone believes what they believe. How is it possible that everyone is going to sign on? And he answered me with a great parable, a great mashal, which I shared before in different contexts and different groups here. The mashal, the parable, is of a group of people who are lost in a forest, in the middle of the night. And it's frightening, and it's confusing. And some say, that's the way to go, that's where the road is. Others say, you're crazy, that's bringing us further that's death, we have to go that way, that's where the road is. Other people said, no, that's where the road is. Other people said, over my dead body will I take a step in that direction, that's where the road is. Over my dead body will I take a step in that direction. And as he says that, the sun starts to come up, and they see the road. And he said, over my dead body, I'll take one step in that direction. Oh, let's go. There it is. What do you mean? What happened to over my dead body? Yeah, when I was in the dark, I was convinced that was the right way. Now that it's light, there it is. Let's go. And that's the Mashiach who's compared to this or, this light of clarity.
Whose parable was
that? One of my rabbis shared it with me. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take any more time. I just have a few questions.
Okay.
Do you mind?
I don't mind.
Colossos were part of the Inquisition and all that stuff, so I'm really quite interested in the history. But the smicha, I missed because I was a little bit. The smicha stopped at that point. Why the Inquisition?
No, nothing to do with the Inquisition. It stopped around the year 450 in our exile.
So, but the Inquisition in Spain you mentioned, in 1492, they all left.
Right. No, so there, those Jews were looking for a way to cleanse themselves and their record.
Correct.
And there the Mari Beirav said, with lashes we can do that,
yeah.
But we need to reinstate the Sanhedrin. So that's why he reinstated at that point.
So there was no Sanhedrin at
for
the
about
time
1,000 years. For about 1,000. Anyway, for about 1,000 years, the Jewish people no longer had Sanhedrin, no longer had anyone with smicha.
But they had rabbis.
We had rabbis, yes.
But not
the
the Sanhedrin.
smicha is talking about a direct line of smicha going back from Moshe to Yeshua
I was just-
and on. Right, that's that smicha. Yeah, we had that last week. That's a special type of smicha that is needed in order to perform certain acts. That's the Beit Din Hagadol, and that we haven't had since about I think they said the year 450, something like that.
From what I read about the Inquisition, there were Jews who became crypto-Jews, and there were Jews who just refused. And there were Jews who refused. Most of them were left alone, and they could go at some point. That's what I was told, I read, because of the history of the family. Because in our family, it's Carrassos and Abravanel.
Oh, so some of your family were allowed to remain as Jews?
Yeah, they were all around Jews.
Interesting.
And Abravanel too. They left, they never converted.
Right.
They never converted.
Yeah, there was some, Abravanel I know of. Yeah.
Well, he was part of sort of,
The ruling class there.
Don Isaac.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, let me allow everyone to bench over here.
yeah.
We'll call it over here, my friends. Yeshua Koach. All right, thank you for joining us. Yes.
I just have a question, if it's okay.